The morning of March 14th, 1983 came in at 14 degrees, with a wind out of the northwest that carried the smell of last year's silage from somewhere down the section road. Russell McAllister was 61 years old that day, standing in his kitchen at 6:15, drinking black coffee out of a chipped enamel mug, when he heard the truck pull into the yard. He set the mug down on the counter beside the sink. He looked at his wife, Esther, who was breaking eggs into a cast-iron skillet. He told her it was them. She did not turn around. She had been expecting them for 9 days. So had he. Russell walked out onto the porch in his shirt sleeves and watched the flatbed swing around in the gravel. The bank had sent 2 men this time. The first was a driver Russell did not recognize. The second was Bradley Tilson, the loan officer, 28 years old, dressed in a tan jacket that did not look warm enough for the weather. Bradley climbed down from the cab with a clipboard in his hand and a folded paper in his pocket. He walked across the yard with the kind of step a young man makes when he wants to look older than he is. Russell did not come down off the porch. Esther watched from the kitchen window. The John Deere 4440 was parked in the equipment shed behind the barn. Russell had bought it new in 1978, financed through First National Bank of Sheldon, the same bank his father had used since 1937. The note had run to $42,000 over 7 years. He had paid steady for 4.5. Then corn dropped to $2.10 a bushel in the fall of 1981. Then it dropped to 184 cents in the fall of 1982. The interest rate on his operating loan had climbed from 9% to 17.5% in less than 3 years. He had refinanced once. The bank had not let him refinance twice. He was 3 payments behind. The tractor was worth more than what he owed on it, but that did not matter to the bank, and it did not matter to Bradley Tilson, and Russell knew it. Bradley read the repossession order out loud on the porch, the way the law required. Russell listened without speaking. When Bradley finished, he tucked the paper back in his jacket pocket and looked at Russell and almost said something kind. Russell could see him deciding whether to. Then Bradley grinned. It was not a cruel grin, exactly. It was the grin of a young man trying to make a hard moment easier on himself. He told Russell, in a voice meant for the driver to hear, that he hoped Russell had not been planning to plant this year. Said it the way a man says something at a bar. The driver laughed. Bradley laughed a beat later, like he was catching up to his own joke. Russell did not say anything. He looked at the driver. He looked at Bradley. He looked past them at the equipment shed where the tractor sat with its key still in the ignition. He went back inside, closed the door behind him. Esther was scraping the eggs onto a plate. She did not ask. He sat down at the table and ate the eggs and drank his coffee, and out in the yard the chains rattled, and the diesel started, and the flatbed pulled away with the John Deere 4440 strapped down behind it. Russell did not get up from the table until the sound of the truck had faded down the section road, and the only thing left was the wind. Then he walked to the window and looked out at the empty shed. The doors were still open. He had left them open the night before, the way he always did. There was a square of light on the dirt floor where the front wheels had stood for 4.5 years. The light fell on nothing now. Esther came up beside him. She put her hand on his back. She said one word. She said the word well. Then she went and poured him another cup of coffee. He drank in standing at the window. He did not sit back down for nearly an hour. He spent the rest of that day in the kitchen with a pencil and a piece of brown paper. He was not making plans for next year. He was not thinking about the bank. He was making a list. The list ran to 2 pages by sundown. It included a Massey Harris pony tractor frame from 1948 that his grandfather had left rusting in the windbreak behind the south barn. It included a Caterpillar D6 diesel engine that had seized up in a sandpit operation outside Spencer in 1971 and had been sitting under a tarp at Lyle Bjorkman's salvage yard ever since. It included a hydraulic pump from an abandoned Galleon road grader he had seen behind the county shop in Primgar. It included tires. It included steel plate. It included a transmission housing he was not sure existed yet. Esther read the list over his shoulder. She did not ask. She set down a plate of cornbread and walked back to the sink. Russell had been a diesel mechanic in the 1st Marine Division from January of 1951 through the summer of 1953. He had spent 18 months at the Chosin Reservoir and beyond, keeping trucks and tractors and bulldozers running in temperatures that froze the oil solid in the pans. He had learned to rebuild an engine without a manual. He had learned to forge parts on a portable field anvil. He had come home in October of 1953 to the same 320 acres his great-grandfather had broken sod on in 1881, and he had taken over the farm from his father in 1955, and he had worked it for 28 years without ever once thinking about what he had learned in Korea. He thought about it now. He thought about it every minute of every day for the next 2 weeks. The neighbors found out about the repossession by Thursday. By Friday, Henry Tovson across the road had called twice to offer his old Alice Chalmers for the spring. Russell thanked him and said no. By the following Monday, 3 other neighbors had called with similar offers. He thanked each one and said no. He did not explain. The community decided he was being proud. A few of them got angry about it at the coffee shop in Sheldon. One of them, a younger man named Doyle Peterson, who farmed the half-section to the east, said out loud that Russell McAllister was going to lose his place by July because he was too stubborn to take help. Doyle said it loud enough that the waitress heard. The waitress was Esther's second cousin. She told Esther by supper time. Esther did not tell Russell. She had learned, across 35 years of marriage, that some things did better untold. Russell drove out to Lyle Bjorkman's salvage yard on the morning of March 21st. The temperature had come up into the 30s. The snow was rotting in the ditches. Lyle was 68 years old and walked with a cane and had known Russell since they were boys at the Lutheran school in Sheldon. Russell asked about the D6 engine. Lyle said it was still there, said the block was sound, but the head was cracked and the injectors were probably gone, and nobody had touched it in 12 years. Russell asked how much. Lyle said $50 and a pound of Esther's blackberry preserves. Russell paid the $50 and promised the preserves. Lyle helped him load the engine onto the flatbed using an A-frame hoist that creaked the whole time. The engine weighed almost 2,800 pounds. Russell tied it down with chain, drove home slow. He hauled the Massey Harris frame out of the windbreak the next afternoon. It was so eaten through with rust that the wheels crumbled when he tried to lift it. He kept the frame rails, cut away everything else with a torch. The frame rails were the only part of the original tractor that survived. He set them up on sawhorses in the equipment shed, where the John Deere had stood the week before. He stared at them for almost an hour before he picked up a tape measure. He worked from 5 in the morning until 10 at night for the next 6 weeks. He stripped the D6 engine down to the block. He pulled the cracked head and drove it to a machine shop in Sioux Center, where a man named Anderson agreed to weld and resurface it for $90 on a handshake. He rebuilt the injectors with parts he ordered from a diesel supply house in Omaha, using a money order Esther had hidden in a coffee can since 1976. He cut the Massey Harris frame rails down by 16 inches on each end, then welded steel plate across the gaps to widen the chassis for the larger engine. He scavenged a transmission out of a 1962 Oliver 1800 that had thrown a rod in 1979 and been parked behind a corn crib outside Sanborn ever since. The owner sold it to him for $30 and 3 jars of Esther's preserves. The hydraulic pump came out of the galleon grader for nothing, because the county had been trying to get rid of it for 3 years and was glad to see it go. He had one bad week in mid-April. The engine, finally assembled, would not start. He cranked it for the better part of 2 days. He pulled the injectors twice. He bled the fuel lines 3 times. He checked the timing 4 times. On the evening of the 8th day, sitting on an overturned bucket in the equipment shed with his hands black to the wrist, he discovered that he had installed the timing gear 1 tooth off. He corrected it. The engine fired on the next crank. It ran rough for 90 seconds and then it smoothed out and it idled like a wristwatch. Russell shut it down, walked to the house. Did not say anything to Esther. She brought him a sandwich. He ate it standing at the kitchen sink. The transmission gave him trouble for another 9 days. The hydraulics gave him trouble for 6. He fabricated a custom steering box from parts of 2 different power steering units, one from a 1966 Chevrolet pickup and the other from a piece of forklift equipment Lyle had thrown in for free. He welded the seat mount from rebar. He used a tractor seat off a 1954 Ford 8N that Esther had been using as a flower planter on the front step for the past 8 years. He painted the whole machine with 2 cans of barn red Rust-Oleum he had on the shelf already. He did not paint a name on it. He did not paint a logo. He did not paint stripes. It was the color of an old barn. It looked, when it was finished, like exactly what it was, which was a tractor built by a man who knew what a tractor was for. He started it for the last time in the yard on the morning of May 1st, 1983. Esther came out onto the porch in her apron and stood with her arms crossed and watched him drive it in a slow circle around the gravel. He drove it up to the porch and stopped. She looked at it for a long time. Then she said it sounded like a real one. He told her it was a real one. She nodded once, went back inside. He hooked the plow to it that afternoon. It was a 6-bottom moldboard plow his father had bought in 1962. The one piece of major equipment the bank had not been able to repossess because it had been paid off in 1968 and was not collateralized on any of the current notes. Russell pulled out of the yard at 1 in the afternoon and drove down the section road toward the east quarter. 3 neighbors stopped to watch him from their porches as he passed. Doyle Peterson came out into his yard with his arms folded. Henry Thompson took off his cap. None of them said anything as Russell went by. The tractor sounded different from a factory tractor. It was lower in the chest, slower in the throttle. It sounded like something that had been built rather than bought. The exhaust came up out of a stack he had fabricated from 2-inch black pipe, and it puffed in time with the cylinders, a slow, steady cadence that carried across the open ground for a quarter mile in every direction. Children at the Peterson place came out into the yard to watch him pass. A dog ran along the fence line beside the road. Russell did not turn his head. He kept his eyes on the gate at the east quarter and his hands on the wheel he had fabricated from a Chevrolet, steering column and a piece of pipe. He plowed the east quarter in 2 days. He plowed the south quarter in 3. He plowed the home 80 in a single long afternoon that ran from sunup until full dark. By May 9th, he had every acre of his 320 turned and ready to disc. Doyle Peterson, who had a new John Deere 4640 financed at 16%, finished his ground on May 14th. Henry Thompson, with a Massey Ferguson 1155 that was 2 years newer than Russell's repossessed 4440 had been, finished on May 16th. The corn went in across the county the 3rd week of May, and Russell had his planted on May 19th, 2 full days ahead of any neighbor on either side of him. The corn came up even. The corn grew tall. The summer of 1983 was one of the best growing seasons O'Brien County had seen in 11 years, with rains coming through in the 2nd week of June and again in mid-July, and the temperatures staying just below the burn point through August. Russell harvested his east quarter on October 8th. The yield came in at 167 bushels per acre. The county average that year was 138. Doyle Peterson, whose 4640 had been sitting in his shed for 2 weeks with a hydraulic problem his dealer had not been able to fix, harvested at 121. Henry Thompson came in at 134. Russell's total harvest across all 320 acres ran to just over 53,000 bushels of corn. At 320s a bushel, his gross came to nearly $170,000. He paid off the back interest on the operating note. He paid off the back property taxes. He bought Esther a new freezer for the basement and a wool coat she had been needing for 2 winters. He put the rest in a savings account at a different bank, one in Spencer, run by a man his father had known. Bradley Tilson stopped by the farm on November 3rd. Russell saw him pull into the yard and did not come out. Esther met him at the door. Bradley asked if Russell was available to speak. Esther said he was busy. Bradley asked when would be a good time. Esther said she did not know. Bradley stood on the porch for almost a full minute before he climbed back in his car and drove away. He did not come back. He was let go from First National in the spring of 1985 when the bank itself was absorbed by a larger institution out of Des Moines, and he moved to Omaha and went into insurance. Russell heard about it from Lyle Bjorkman. He did not say anything when he heard, just nodded once and went back to whatever he had been doing. The neighbors came around slow. Doyle Peterson never apologized for what he had said at the coffee shop, but he asked Russell, in the winter of 1984, if Russell would help him diagnose a transmission problem on his 4640 that the dealer had given up on. Russell drove over the next morning, found the issue in 40 minutes, did not charge him. Doyle tried to pay him $50. Russell told him to put it in the offering plate at the Lutheran church on Sunday. Doyle put it in. Russell saw him do it. Neither of them mentioned it. Word spread. Other farmers asked Russell about the tractor. They wanted to see it. They wanted to know how he had built it. He showed anyone who asked. He gave them the parts list. He gave them the welding patterns. He gave them the timing specifications for the D6 engine. He never charged $1. He told them his grandfather and his father had both kept their machines running through worse than the farm crisis, and that he was not going to be the first McAllister to charge a neighbor for help. A man from the Des Moines Register drove up in the spring of 1985 and asked to interview Russell about the tractor. Russell declined. The reporter asked again. Russell told him he had work to do. The reporter wrote a small piece anyway, working off interviews with neighbors. The headline ran, "Iowa Farmer Builds Tractor from Junk, Outplowed County." Russell never read it. Esther cut it out and put it in a scrapbook in her bedroom dresser. The tractor kept running. Russell used it as his primary machine from 1983 through 1996. He built 2 more tractors after the first one, both for himself, both from scrap, both better than the first. He helped neighbors build 4 others. By the late 1980s, 6 different farms in O'Brien County were running on what people in town had started calling McAllister tractors, though Russell himself never used the term and corrected anyone who did. He said they were just tractors. He said any man with a welder and a parts list could build one. Esther passed in the winter of 2001 of pneumonia at the age of 79. Russell sold off most of his land in 2004, when he was 82, keeping only the home 80 and the equipment shed. He died in May of 2009 of heart failure, sitting in the kitchen with the same chipped enamel coffee mug on the table beside him. The farm went to his son, who lived in Des Moines and worked as an accountant, and had not been back to the farm for more than a long weekend in 20 years. The son sold the land, he sold the buildings, but he could not bring himself to sell the first tractor. He had it hauled to a small museum in Sheldon dedicated to the history of Iowa agriculture, where it sits today, painted the same barn red rust-oleum, with a hand-lettered sign explaining where each part came from and what years Russell McAllister had welded it together. A high school shop teacher in Storm Lake brought a group of students out to see it in 2014. One of the boys, 16 years old, asked the museum docent why somebody would go to all that trouble when they could just buy a tractor on credit. The docent did not have a ready answer. He told the boy he was not sure, said maybe Russell had not had a choice, said maybe Russell had wanted to prove something, said maybe Russell had been the kind of man who did not believe in being told no. The boy thought about it for a while, and then he said, mostly to himself, that he would like to learn how to weld. The shop teacher heard him say it. 2 years later, that boy graduated and went to a technical college in Mason City and got his certification. He works as a heavy equipment mechanic in northwest Iowa now. He still drives past the museum every few months. He has built 1 tractor of his own, not from scrap, from a kit, but he says he is working up to it. The original tractor still runs. The museum starts it once a year on the Saturday before the 4th of July, in front of whoever happens to be visiting. The diesel coughs once, then it catches. Then it settles into that low, even idle that Esther McAllister on a May morning in 1983 had said sounded like a real one. It still does. Still working, still red, still doing what it was built to do. If this is the kind of story you want more of, the kind where a quiet man with grease under his fingernails outlasts the men in tan jackets who came to take what was his, the kind where the answer turned out to be the work of his own hands, take a moment before you go. There is another one waiting for you, just below this video, and it is every bit as worth your time as this one was. Hit the bell so the next one finds you. Leave a comment and tell us about the toughest piece of equipment in your family, the one nobody could kill, the one your father or your grandfather kept running long past when it should have quit. We read every one of them. Until next time, keep your hands in the work and remember that what a man zibbles himself, no bank can ever take.